The Somalis belong to the group of nations in northeastern Africa, collectively known as Eastern Cushites, is by all available evidence securely established that their nearest kin within this family of nations, the Baiso and the Rendile, as well as a preponderant majority of all the Eastern Cushites, are still clustered around, or within a short distance from, what must have been the cradle land of the group is also well known. It must be accepted, therefore, that the original movement of the Somalis was north and eastwards, into the Horn, rather than south and westwards out of it. The linguistic and archaeological arguments advanced for the Oromo presence in the Horn of Africa before the Somali occupation have also been proven to be untenable. With this established, Dr. Ian Murden Lewis's example of pockets of Oromo peoples among the northwestern Somalis as an indication of Oromo presence there before the Somali onslaught loses credibility. In fact, these pockets can very legitimately be attributed to Oromo incursion into Somali territory since the 16th century. Ultimately, though, the weightiest evidence for the southward ethnic migration was drawn by earlier scholarship from the oral traditions. All other arguments are employed merely to shore up the oral reconstruction. But the vistas of oral traditions are fraught with built-in abuses which do frequently cancel out their legitimate uses. Each generation, unwittingly and sometimes consciously, grafts on the past a lot of the ideas and ideals currently in vogue. They are usually imprecise as far as chronology goes, and tend to be confused with regard to events occurring in more distant ages. Without denying their legitimate use as one of the hallmarks of true African historiography, and for that matter of other non-literate societies, one must nevertheless guard against this hamstringing tendency of oral traditions towards the bizarre, and treat them with delicate care. In his numerous studies, Dr. Ian Murden Lewis has shown time and again how Somali traditions are lacking in precise factual content and are only representational charters justifying contemporary conditions and beliefs. A closer examination of the very oral traditions, which are employed by the earlier scholars to prove Somali origins in the north, would show that these traditions actually relate to recent migrations occurring since the 16th century and have nothing to do with distant events. They may well be confused and suspected as regards time, depth, and even inaccurate in the case of detail and chronology. Their description of events occurring on the Horn of Africa in recent centuries, however, is in outline fairly reliable and persuasive. They narrate the story of Islamized Somalis marching inland from northern and eastern coast in conditions of intermittent conflict with non-Muslims or superficially Islamized groups of peoples, normally referred to simply as Galamado, black infidels. The question of the so-called Gala graves will have to wait a more thorough archaeological investigation, though again Dr. Ian Murden Lewis's excavation of 3 samples has made him conclude that at least some of them, why not all of them, are comparatively recent and contain Somali remains. Some written sources seem to lend support to the theory propounding Somali south and westwards, especially movements occurring during more recent centuries of the Islamic era. For instance, the Futuh al-Habasha, which was written in the 16th century, speaks in its enumerations of the participants in the 16th century jihad against Ethiopia of a number of what are today huge clan families, widely scattered and too numerous to be contained in any of the traditional political structure, as though they were only small lineage groups in localized areas far to the north and east. Therefore, their differentiation into widely dispersed clans, lineages, and Diapaying groups must have taken place since then, as a result of rapid population increases and territorial expansion. One elderly Somali scholar, after examining the genealogies of the northern Somali princely families, arrived at the conclusion that 200 years ago the Somali population could not have been a quarter of its present magnitude. This multiplication and expansion of the Islamized Somali group since the 16th century may help elucidate the process of Islam's penetration of the interior, but it cannot say nothing about Somali nation's origins. What transpires from our discussion thus far is that while the Somalis have moved up north into the Horn at an indefinite time in the past, there was a reverse movement occasioned by increase in population, perhaps periodically given impetus by the desire to spread Islam. Irrespective of whether they appeared as a nation on the northern shores of the Horn or further to the south, it is clear that the Somalis are indigenous to the northeastern Horn of Africa. What cannot be so easily explained is their strong attachment to, and identification with, the Arab world. In the following few paragraphs we shall try to explore the various means by which Somali striving for Arab identity has found expression, and the Arab elements in the Somali culture that may be said to be behind this otherwise inexplicable campaign. A cursory examination of Somali history and present conditions in the Somali Democratic Republic will reveal the striking impact the Arabs and their culture have had on the Somalis. Superficially, one encounters this Arab influence if one inquires into the origins of the ethnic name Somali. Out of 5 popular explanations, 3 are based on Arabic etymologies, the other 2 being, naturally enough, from Amharic and Somali sources. These explanations, all of dubious authenticity, as they are nothing more than the fancies of folk literature and philological speculations, nonetheless do express, albeit mythologically, the Somalis' indebtedness to the Arabs. Since its inception in 1960, the Somali Republic, officially the Somali Democratic Republic as of October 21, 1969, felt the pressure of outstanding Somali politicians and some Arab governments, which desired it to join the Arab League. Its sentiments, however, proved to be more Islamic than Arabic, for it hosted one pan-Islamic conference, but balked at any suggestion of it joining the Arab League. To harbor sentiments of pan-Islamic brotherhood and solidarity with the neighboring Arab co-religionists was one thing, but to substitute an Arab identity for the Somali one was quite another. In any case, during the 1960s this Somali attachment to the Arab Islamic world frustrated attempts to write the previously unwritten Somali in Latin or locally developed scripts for religious and cultural reasons. But on October 21, 1972, Somali was written in Latin anyway. This important decision, however, posed no difficulties to the campaign for Arab identity, which finally achieved political results with the joining of the Arab League by the Somali Democratic Republic on February 14, 1974. Ethnically, continued colonization of the Somali coasts by Arabs and other Muslim Asians has given rise to partially Somalized communities who, despite their being domiciled in Somaliland for centuries, have nevertheless preserved their Arab culture and display it in all aspects of their life. They are usually met within the Banadiri ports, where they constitute significant proportions of the urban population and attract attention by their distinctive Arab features and dress. Fewer have penetrated inland as shopkeepers and religious leaders in interior towns. Others went further ahead and took to cultivation or the pastoral life of the nomadic Somalis with whom they intermarried. They are totally indistinguishable physically, linguistically, or culturally from the other Somalis, though their recent arrival is still remembered, and their special affinity with the Arabs is recognized. Culturally, the Arab-Muslim impact is most readily seen in coastal population centers, where it pervades almost all aspects of urban life. Arabo-Persian influences are clearly visible, even to the untrained observer, in the architectural styles on the Somali coasts. The structural design, construction material used, characteristic artistic motif, engravings on wooden doors and windows, and all other decorational additions of coastal buildings exhibit Arabo-Persian affinities. The science of building permanent dwellings out of stone and mortar is unknown to the nomad and the agriculturalist of the countryside, though some of that skill has been taken in a simplified form to interior towns founded within the last 100 years. Some of the settlements of the Adal Sultanate, such as Harar and other abandoned ruined towns in northwestern Somaliland, also appear to have been very much influenced by Arab building techniques. Written sources which ascribe the peopling, if not the founding, of the coastal towns to immigrant groups from southwestern Asia also provide some support for the Asiatic borrowings, and the inscriptions on the most ancient buildings in these towns, which attribute their construction to Persian or Arab masons and benefactors, give further corroboration. Most of the tools, utensils, other household ware, ornaments and perfumes, sartorial styles and their color designs, some of the foodstuffs and the culinary art, etc., that constitute the totality of the urban material culture, are unmistakably of Arab Islamic derivation, as Benigni Grottinelli has observed. In some cases, a direct Arab, Mohammedan origin is self-evident. Tisbas, Islamic rosaries, wooden tablets, coal bottles, horse trappings, most of the silverworks, such as bracelets, anklets, amulet cases, etc., are not only of Arab type, but are often produced by Arab or Persian craftsmen living in the coastal towns of Somalia. Even the advanced weaving and dyeing techniques of the Banadiri, though known nowhere outside this coast, has been credited with some justification to overseas Asiatic influences. Almost all these elements of the coastal culture are known by their Arabic nomenclature, a fact which undoubtedly identifies the carriers, if not the original source, of these cultural borrowings. In the countryside, also, some Asiatic cultural influences have been noticed, but with the exception of a few fineries and regalia for ceremonial display, none of them could be traced to an Arab origin. Some scholars who believe that the Somalis forcibly pushed the Oromo peoples and others out of the Horn of Africa account for this feat, among other things, by the Somalis' possession of superior Arab technology. Of course, this technology, which helped in a war situation, must have been more advanced weaponry. For this reason we shall look at the traditional Somali weaponry and try to see if it owes anything to Arab craftsmanship. Among the outstanding traditional weapons which the Somalis use, the most common item is the dagger, bilawe, amle, tore, a double-edged short, occasionally long and arched, cutting blade used in war, for stabbing, hunting and eating, and for all sundry household cutting purposes. This weapon has been found to be native to the Somali and Danakil, Afar, country. It has also been judged to be of great antiquity among these peoples, as evidenced by ancient rock engravings of it in Somaliland, as well as pictures of this same dagger in Egyptian drawings of the land of Punt, made by Queen Hatshepsut's expedition there. Another weapon which is just as common and is a perpetual companion of the Somali pastoralist is the spear, Somali, waran. It consists of a wooden shaft made from hard wood, and in length is about 2 yards. On one end it carries a double-edged blade about a foot long, which gradually tapers to a fine point, and on the other end is fixed a cylindrical pointed iron peg, used for making the spear stand upright, and thus avoid soiling. The spear and its kin, the javelin, mu or jin, tara will, as suggested by their names, appear to be local inventions. However, at least one variety of the Somali spear, one with a slightly triangular blade laterally fastened to the shaft, which has no representation among the wide array of spears used by the Cushitic and Bantu-speaking peoples of East Africa, shows some affinity with Indonesian brands. The club, bud, the sling, wadaf, used now only to drive birds from millet fields, bows and arrows with poisoned heads, konso, and labe, respectively, quiver, gabawoye, and the shield, gashan, which make for the rest of Somali traditional weaponry, show no influence from outside Northeast Africa. Among the weapons worn for ceremonial display of wealth or office, and which were originally of foreign contrivance, is a decorated type of dagger found in the coastal settlements. Within this category also is a very rare kind of sword which betrays Moroccan or Indonesian influences. During the 15th century, Abyssinian armies fighting Muslim forces, of which the Somalis constituted a significant proportion, were known to use Moroccan swords. In the 16th century, during the Great Jihads, Moroccan adventurers fought with Muslim forces against the Abyssinians and could thus have imparted their skills to the Somalis. The Indonesian motif, however, is equally evident, and the possibility of its introduction from that direction during pre-Islamic times is equally plausible. Wooden sandals, men's skull caps, and musical instruments found in the interior of Somaliland have been related by ethnologists to Indonesian types. Indeed, Indonesian influences upon the Somalis may be greater than otherwise assumed. The Bajuni, in southern Somaliland, use a fishing canoe which is related to outriggers of Madagascar and coconut scrapers, called mbusi and barava, coconut vessels, and the plangi system of dyeing hagog kerchiefs, employed in the southern part of the Banadiri coast, are all said to be native to Indo-Melanesia. What is significant here is that apart from barava, which historically had stronger ties with the East African coast to the south, these apparently Indonesian influences are not commonly found along the coasts colonized by the Muslim Southwest Asians. This means that the resemblances are either coincidental, though it is difficult to account for all those by chance similarities, or, more plausibly, that these cultural items were introduced during pre-Islamic times, before the Arab and Persian colonization of the Banadiri coast. The most dramatic and deep-rooted Arab-Islamic influences upon the Somalis, however, are in the non-material aspects of culture and pertain essentially to religion and learning. Though not to the same extent, these influences are common to both city and countryside among the decidedly Islamic Somali citizenry. The most obvious index of this is the Arabic language which, as the medium of religion, business, and all other social activities requiring literary skill, was always taught and propagated throughout the country. The impact of the Arabic language and the non-material Arab Islamic culture it expresses is so great that of 22 different categories into which Arabic loanwords in Somali were divided, by far the largest category consists of verbs, adjectives, and abstract nouns not included in the other categories. More significant than the language itself is the traditional educational system for which the language served as a medium. All Somali terms pertaining to religion, learning, reading, writing, and education in general are derived from Arabic. Traditional Islamic learning involved two distinct steps and institutions. At the first stage, at which children learn the Quran, pupils attend Quranic schools, Arabic, Kilwa, Somali, Malamed, or Dug C. After finishing their Quranic school, usually in their early or middle teens, those who aspire to religious careers as teachers, mosque imams or missionaries, then proceed to mosque universities, called Zawiyah if it has residential quarters. Here the students learn religious subjects such as Islamic jurisprudence, fiqh, traditions, hadith, translations of the Quran, tafsir, some interpretation, depending upon the learning of the teacher, ta'wil, Islamic law, sharia, and linguistic studies, such as the language itself, lugha, grammar, nahwu, literature, adab, prosody, eruid, etc. This also includes a number of other non-religious subjects, such as tariq, history, and mantak, logic. The separation of the two institutions, i.e. Quranic schools and mosque universities, which appears to have been a more recent development, was necessitated by the fear of children's pilferage and lack of respect for standards of cleanliness required in mosques. The Quranic school, one of the characteristic features of Muslim societies, is an institution which is as old as Islam. Teaching the youth to learn the Quran is among the Somalis, as in all Muslim societies, a very serious affair. Usually beginning their studies before the age of 7, children at first only learn the Quran, but as they progress in age as well as in their studies, they accompany it with some Arabic and, especially in urban centers, with arithmetic. The importance of Arabic lies in the fact that it is the language of the religion. A knowledge of some arithmetic also was always held to be desirable in the Muslim societies, which traditionally displayed strong partiality to business pursuits. Among the Somalis, arithmetic is important for those aspiring to religious careers, since such learned personalities are frequently called upon to divide inheritance according to the proportions prescribed in the Sharia, and also to assess and divide compensations for injuries, the latter being an event of frequent occurrence among the turbulent pastoralists. Education at this stage aims at teaching the children Arabic diction and making them commit the Quran, as much of it as possible, to memory. The pupils use slates or tablets, usually wooden, on which the teacher writes a few verses, ayat, from the Quran. When the pupil memorizes these, the slate is washed and the succeeding set of verses are then assigned. The student follows this procedure starting with shorter chapters and shorter lessons, and progresses to longer and harder assignments until the whole Quran is covered. Somewhere along the way, as the student becomes more familiar with the Arabic language and as lessons become longer, the pupil gives up the slate and starts getting his lessons from the Quran itself. Among the nomads and in certain rural villages, lessons begin in the last third of the night. This may have originated because of the need for children to herd livestock or work in the fields during the day, but it has now become a tradition, and even where there is no need for their services, children still wake up before 3 o'clock and sit around bonfires by the lights of which they read their lessons until daybreak. Each student is required to bring a load of firewood every evening for the next morning's fire. The teacher joins his pupils, who are disciplined by senior students during his absence, after the morning prayers, and tests them individually on the previous lessons before giving them more assignments. Failure usually calls for corporal punishment and, more seriously, public humiliation in front of one's peers. At the higher level, also, the method of education is the same classical Arab system of learning. Normally students sit in front of the teacher, forming a series of semicircular rows facing him. The teacher, or one of his students, at times an advanced student assistant, reads aloud from the text, and Sheikh explains it with the class following from their individual, sometimes shared, texts. Since the teacher rather than the institution is the center of the system, students usually have to travel to different places to study different subjects under different masters. In this personal method of instruction, the student chooses the subject he wants to study, and the master under whom he wishes to study, and even sets his own pace. There is no set syllabus, and the teacher graduates his student when he feels he has acquired enough knowledge. Graduation here, which is the same classical Arab system of personal certification, means that the master allows his student to use his name in texts in his future career. In the countryside, teachers frequently wander to the farthest corners of the country collecting students and depositing graduates as they move from one settlement to the next. This roving institution depends mainly on the hospitality of the different communities whose livestock, farms, babies, and weddings they bless, and for whom they write amulets, qardas or hersi, and prepare prophylactic potions, actuall. During their short stays in the farming villages, or at nomadic encampments, the sheikh and his students are feasted. A few places such as Harar, the Timbuktu of East Africa, Mogadishu, Baraba, Hargeisa, and many lesser centers of learning, especially Tarawa settlements, Jama'at, have acquired national renown and attract students from all over the country. A number of students travel abroad to such famous centers of learning as the Azhar University in Cairo, Zabid, and Sana'a in the Yemen. Others go to the holy sanctuaries, Mecca and Medina, and remain there a number of years in quest of learning and blessings before returning home. These returnees' demerits and values of the Arab culture are constantly brought over to Somaliland, and the Arabization of the Somalis is thus continued. As might be expected, Arab cultural influences upon the Somali were not all positive. Along with the constructive additions, there came some negative contributions. These are elements involving moral laxity such as prostitution, gambling, and the consumption of drugs and alcoholic drinks. Their Arab provenance is proven by the fact that they are associated almost exclusively with the urban life in which the Arab influences, as we have already seen, figure so much. Though the circumstances of their introduction into the country is not altogether clear, nevertheless linguistics leave no doubt of their Arab origin. Having said all this, the small group of Arab and other Asian immigrants aside, the inhabitants of Somaliland belong ethnically and culturally to the Cushitic-speaking family of nations in northeastern Africa. Islam and other Arab cultural influences might well have given Arab Islamic clothing to Somali ethnic identity. They always appeal to their commonality of religion when making peace or seeking mass support for any cause, but anthropologically and linguistically, the Somalis could hardly be said to be different from the neighboring Oromo, fellow Kushites who, unlike the Somalis, make no claims to Arab ancestry. Moreover, as already hinted at and as will be shown in subsequent chapters, it seems that Arab and other Asiatic settlements along the Somali coasts were neither great numerically nor as influential politically as claimed by some authorities. To understand properly how the Arab influences came to exercise such a telling effect on Somali cultural attitudes, we need to look at the historical development of these influences. It will be the task of the remaining chapters to trace the course of their development from their ancient beginnings to the present.